Warning: this podcast contains blasphemy, heresy, and profanity. Proceed at your own risk.
'Cause I'm exactly where I want to be. Yeah, I'm a sinner through and through. And I'll be waiting in hell for you.
Welcome to the Skeptical Satanists.
All right, I'm back, and today I have Mary Byler on from the Amish. I always mess it up.
The Misfit Amish.
I say it the wrong way. Yeah, the Misfit
the Amish Misfits.
Yeah, I always want to say that.
No, we're just the Misfit Amish. That's what we are.
Yeah. So today's episode is What is Love? I think that was other than an 80s song, I believe. But yeah, I thought who better to have on than somebody that grew up Amish to tell me what love is, because I'm sure you guys have a good idea on that, a good grasp on it, right?
I mean, I would say that's a really interesting, way to go when you start talking about our definition of love. Like, I recently wrote this wonderful blog post where I talk about our definition of love, and part of that is so inside of our culture, love is very transactional. And I call it transactional because everything is conditional upon you complying with whatever the demands of the authoritarian leadership has decided that you must do. And if you don't comply with that, then your status of being worthy of receiving love is revoked. However, they will shun you and socially isolate you and gossip about you, and there's a whole list of things in the name of love. And they'll say you brought it upon yourself because you chose this, and you knew that if you did those things that you would be shunned.
This was something that I'd kind of struggled with, and we had more of a not quite the same kind of shunning that you guys have. It was more of a passive-aggressive shunning that we had talked about earlier, but I'd found it difficult to try to define what love was after coming out of my Christian upbringing. And after joining the debate group and everything as well, I'd started seeing Christians try to take on these subjects of love and things, and it's like, how are you defining that? And it's often like ownership, looking at people as ownership, like or looking at people as property to be owned, and obedience and authoritarian values, and they'll claim that it's unconditional, but then there's several instances where it isn't. It isn't unconditional at all. And I don't even know what that would look like. Like, whenever I hear people talk about unconditional love, I think there should be conditions in the sense of at least boundaries and things. And that's another thing that they don't have, is they don't have boundaries in their form of love. And there's no accountability for their actions or anything, and there's no real... It's all very controlling and manipulative.
So tell me a little bit more about when you talk about the passive-aggressive type of shunning that your religion practice.
Yeah, I would say that pertained more to like, they might not outright shun you or anything, but if you were to have developed different views that disagreed with their construct of their religion and everything, and you were to become vocal about that in any way or whatever, it's going to get quiet and awkward for you. For them, they're probably going to be talking about you behind your back, and then they'll have prayer requests and things maybe not, they might mention your name, or they might mention your name and say that it's a what did they call it? It's like a silent prayer or something, or a silent request, or something like that, to where they didn't have to actually give details of it, but they would at least. But if they're already gossiping about it, then everyone already knows.
Right. So here's a question. Do you feel like there was any space in that religion for people to dissent without being called rebellious or labeled rebellious, or even like accused of having a I don't know, we always called it a funny hook lava, which would be like going to a different faith or something like that. Like, was there any space for dissenters to even verbalize that? Like, could you?
Not really. It would, like I said, it would very much go into the same kind of thing. There would be a lot of talk behind your back and stuff, and not really. There might be a tiny bit of room for that, to where they would at least still, like, you'd still be welcome in the church, but they wouldn't be happy about the views being different.
Oh, so if, like, per se, like you did all of that, and then you ended up, like, you dissented, and then you ended up on the prayer list and being gossiped about. Which, by the way, my mug, I want to give a shout out to the Plain People's Podcast.
Nice.
It says, "We see you're back on the Wednesday night prayer list." I mean, they might be praying for you now, so they might be. It is a possibility.
Oh, I'm masturbating for them. So we're doing.
Okay.
We're doing just. At least somebody's getting some enjoyment out of that.
It's fucking glorious. Yeah. So, sometimes when you have churches that don't specifically even, because here's the other thing, it's like, you were on my podcast, like, we did a series about deconstructing from our previous religions, and one of the things that came up is you had never considered that what your church did to be actual shunning, but when you look at the definition of shunning, there is a form of it. So
Yeah.
churches shunning by any name is still shunning. It doesn't matter what they call it or whether they call it anything. If they practice it, it's still a form of shunning, and often shunning can extend to family members. Would that be a possibility, or is it just simply the person?
Yeah, it would definitely go into family members as well. If you had, like, your parents were still going to the church and you decided not to, or to not go along with the things being said there, you might have that parent being coerced, like, they're still being coerced by the church and their doctrines and everything, because they've got the guilt and shame thing going on with, well, that's bad parenting, then you must not be doing something right, you must,
Right.
which,
Because the sins of the fathers rest on the children.
right, and that just fits with the whole no accountability thing of Christianity to begin with, because their whole entire form of of religion is based on not being held accountable for their own actions, and somebody else being held accountable for those things. So, like Jesus, the whole thing of Jesus dying on the cross for people's sins, so that they don't have to be held accountable for their sins. Jesus did that, so even sinning afterwards, they can just, pray to God, and then those sins are absolved, so it doesn't matter anymore.
So do you think people are attracted to the religion because of the absolution?
The absolution in what? In absolving? Yeah, I think not that could be, whether they know that that's what's attractive to them or not. I don't know. I think it's normalized, a lot of normalized behaviors that people just never bothered to question.
Well, and that's because, like, when when we are raised a certain way. So like when I'm a life coach too, by the way. But like one of the things that we learned about in our classes that I took is belief systems. And so when you're raised, you have your internal belief systems and you have like your brain is developing. So your parents and your community, they shape your belief systems. So how do you like, and society as a whole shapes your belief system as well. So they all play a role in how your beliefs develop. So when you are raised in an insular community like that, how do you begin to navigate figuring out what are your beliefs
Yeah.
and what was ingrained in you to believe?
Yeah. I mean, there's also like whenever I'd deconstructed and everything, that was a thing that I'd struggled with as well, was distinguishing between like feelings and thoughts, and like recognizing that feelings can be valid, because you'll hear that a lot, but that gets kind of bastardized in psychology to the point of encompassing thoughts as well, and or beliefs. And I don't think that beliefs need to be validated every time, or the thoughts attached to the feelings you're having need to be necessarily validated. I think that those thoughts or beliefs should be validated in another way, and that would be through questioning and testing those things. And I don't think that's a bad thing to be doing. And I think it should be just as easy to question those things as what we do with anything else that we don't know, or we you know
Absolutely.
hold to be true or whatever. Yeah.
Well, and the truth will usually stand up to questioning. That's the thing, is that's a key thing, is like typically when you're able to question those beliefs, like or those thoughts that you're having, like are they really true, right?
Exactly. And like the way that I view it anymore, looking at things from more humanist standpoint, skeptical, and Satanist standpoint, it is like, what's the worst that can happen from questioning things that I think are true or might be true? What, I'm going to find out that I was wrong, and then I get to learn something new?
That's
That's not a bad thing, and
no.
it shouldn't be made into a bad thing, like it gets to be.
Well, and I always try to encourage people to be curious, to receiving new information that they previously haven't received. And if you receive new information, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that you are now able to make a better, more informed choice about what you're consciously choosing to believe. So, like, for example, going back to the whole topic of like, what is love? When you have a transactional type of love inside of a patriarchal community where everything is based on, the headship principles. Are you familiar with those?
What are you talking about, like what the principles of submitting to an authoritarian figure of some
Well, the
sort?
woman is the weaker vessel. There's
Hmm.
no like I had a really interesting conversation with somebody the other day about how the woman is the weaker vessel, and one of the core values that is held is that in order for a woman to be happy, she must submit to the
Yeah.
men. Like
Wives, submit to your husbands.
this in my culture, and literally like it is worded, women submit to the men,
Okay.
not just the husbands, not just the like ministry, not just the people in positions of power, not just whatever, like they will assign a committee of men sometimes to manage things, because that person supposedly can't manage things, especially like finances. They have problems with that. They will literally take ownership of somebody's company if they have dissenting views and voice them sometimes. It just depends on how much power that person has versus whether or not they're going to assign somebody to take over whatever business this person has. Like, it happens within the community. So where where do you begin to define like your personal autonomy? Where can you define any form of consent, and where does it intersect with the belief that you must submit to men? So if you must submit to men, does that mean if somebody comes up and wants to rape you, you just have to allow him to rape you?
Well, your property in their minds, so
I mean,
there's no real value in property except for you get to be, and that's the Bible I'm talking about, of course, not my own views
should
now,
I sell my child then? Is
right.
my bad.
Well, that's what they did. I mean, that's what a dowry was and everything. That's happened throughout history and it's biblical. That's one of the verses that I was thinking of was about that. And even in terms of rape, the only like justice being done is, or whatever the fuck you'd want to call it, according to them, it would be justice or whatever, or just and right, because God made that decision. But the thing of, what isn't it? The rapist has to pay the husband or something. There isn't any. There's no real punishment at all for that crime or accountability being. There's
several stories about rape in the Bible, and one of the stories that I've always taken great pleasure in is if it literally says if you are a woman and you're out in the field, and I forget exactly which verse it is, but it says if you're a woman and you're out in the fields and somebody comes and rapes you, then they should stone him to death. Oh, if you scream, though. Let me give you the caveat. If you scream. But if you're in town and somebody rapes you, then you should both be put to death, both the rapist and the victim.
That sounds like justice.
Oh, I want to grab a letter from my egg donor. I think I have a very important point to make about love.
I do hope you save some of this for the Mother's Day special, though, too. Because we've got lots to talk about on that.
Yes. This one is just, this is so interesting because she wrote this letter, right? And I've, maintained some of these purely so I remember exactly what her beliefs were. God, I pray God give you wisdom to pursue the extra tasks he gave to you.
What are the extra tasks he gave to you?
I don't know, but you need not apply for Mother of the Year award. And
wow.
Yeah, that one. But that is indicative of like how they view, like, so for those who don't know me, there's a lot out there about my story. I experienced like over a decade of child abuse, child sexual abuse, child abuse of all sorts and types. Whatever.
Is that what she's calling a task? Is the trauma and shit that's just being reduced to a task? Is that what it is? Wow.
So that's the belief that's held, is God let that happen to me. And as a child, she would tell me that, well, you didn't pray hard enough, and you didn't fight hard enough, and you didn't believe, you didn't have enough faith.
Oh, it's either that or God. It's part of God's plan.
So
it's an infuriating one too.
When you pray, don't forget to pray. Thy will be done. Because people have been praying for me for a long time.
That was something that I'd mentioned to you as well. The silver lining thing, I can't get on board with. That's a horrible thing. I've heard it from not just Christians, but I've heard it in the secular community as well, where they try to I guess try to make you. I understand the intent. I think it's usually to try to make you not feel so bad or something, or try to cheer you up in a way about the shit that you've like.
But here's the thing. If people are sitting there and they are sharing their pain with you,
Right.
you do not bypass their pain.
Yeah.
You acknowledge their pain.
Exactly.
And when you attempt to find the silver lining in what happened to them that absolutely is horrifying and should not have happened to them, you are bypassing their pain. And in a sense, you are gaslighting them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's almost to the point of saying that, well, those things had to happen for you to have this silver lining.
But they didn't.
No, there's no,
They didn't have to happen. It's like I tell people, like, do I know how to cook, sew, garden, clean, etc.? Yes. But you know what? I could have learned all of those skills without going through the years of torture and terror that I experienced.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And
then typically, some people will even follow that up with, but look at you now and who you are now. Would you ever be the person? Okay, I'd ask you a better question.
We don't know.
Who would I be had none of those things happened to me?
Right, we don't know. We don't know. But we could speculate all day on those things.
Right.
And it doesn't matter. We do know that other people could grow up without all of those horrible things and do just fine.
Right. And they've done wonderful things in the world too.
Right.
So just because something that you experience that you are able to speak out about and talk about to raise awareness about those things, and you're able to be an activist about those specific issues, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't have done those things had you not experienced specifically like the abuse that you experienced.
Yeah, it's also a lot of black and white thinking of this good and bad idea, and thinking that good makes up for bad, and bad. That's not how things work. That's not how it works. You can't do good things to make up for bad things. You can't do bad things and disregard good things that you did. That's not how it works. They aren't tied or tethered in that way.
No. And it's just like, when you talk about love and the black and white thinking, like, what's the first thing when I say that? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Love and the black and white thinking of good things and bad things, like these good things make up for the bad things, etc., etc. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
The Bible, the biblical aspect of all of it, God holding those things, the Judgment Day and all of that. I think of a lot of the Christian views of it, and I think that's where a lot of society gets that from. It's just our culture being suffocated by those kinds of ideas and that type of thinking. Right.
Because they sit there and they extend this unconditional love for for people who commit heinous crimes. And specifically in like my churches, like I listened to people confess to heinous crimes, and it was like, we're supposed to extend unconditional love to those people, but there was never any space for the victims of those crimes to speak. There was never any space for us to support the victims of those crimes in a meaningful way. There was no knowledge of how to begin supporting the victims of those crimes. So when you start talking about Amish society and thinking of it as a caste system, do you know what a caste system is?
No.
Well, so they have people who are like considered, it's like a ladder, right? So you have people who are on the lower status, like the victim would be on the lower rung of the ladder. And if the abuser is up here and he's on the top of the ladder, he may go down one step for the crime he committed, but the victim is also loses status because they were victim. And many of them don't actually lose status because they were from a good family. I will tell you that my abusers are good Amish people. And I'm the shunned one.
So it's
like this.
It's still that kind of authoritarian type thing, or
right.
Like the
So men, wealthy people, people from good families.
God.
Well, I mean, God appointed the church leadership, so they're up there too.
I mean, he gets to drown people. He gets to do all kinds of immoral acts and never get held accountable for what he does.
There is that too. and then of course, like, so if a couple doesn't have children, or the amount of children that the church typically has in their families, then, or even if like you have like 8 girls instead of, you don't have any sons, like that can lower your social status. Which is why some people, they will adopt children because they're childless. And so when they adopt children, they portray themselves as the rescuers of these children. Oh, these poor abused children. And sadly, like the abused children, the ones that I've known that were raised inside of those homes have suffered tremendously from both culture shock and like just abuse of all sorts. And it's absolutely horrifying to know that they actually gain social status from adopting children.
I know several people that had adopted and had fostered kids in our church too, and that was, I mean, just to me, just pushing the Christian religion on a kid is enough right there to be causing trauma and horrible behavioral issues and everything else that goes along with it. So it's like, I don't know. I don't see how they seem to think that that's love as well, is to push that's showing love as well, is to push their religion onto their children in that way.
So then what happens to some of the adopted joined-in people inside of Amish, and it's really only like more liberal Amish that adopt children. There's some Amish communities that will never adopt children. It's just you lose your social status, and that's the will of God, right? And then the children that are adopted in, some of them happen to be black and brown, and like even then, like they will never obtain the same social status as somebody up here on this ladder, because they were not born into it, and to be born into it is to be given a gift. This is a gift straight from God. Your Amish heritage.
And then, what does that say about the people that
people?
That's so.
Some people, they're even told they're not allowed to, date outside of their race when they're adopted into communities, because that's biblical.
Yeah, unequally yoked and all of that.
So, but how is that actually showing love?
Right.
It's, I have to ask myself that. How is that showing love and compassion and empathy? And how are you really rescuing these children, or are you just giving yourself a pat on the back for it?
Right. Yeah, so was there, I know the other Christian religions and everything have, they actually have things set up for foster care and things like that. Was it actually, like, did they have buildings and stuff like that where they would do that? Have some kind of an orphanage or something that... I guess I don't know how it works in the Amish community in that
Have you ever heard of
aspect, or
Christian Aid Ministries?
Huh. What is it? Christian Aid Ministries?
Yes, they were established in like the 1980s by Amish and Anabaptist people, and they do ministries, and they go work in orphanages. That's where the 17 hostages were kidnapped last fall. They were
Okay.
held hostage, I believe, for quite a long time, right? And here's the thing: is there was a baby kidnapped because they went into a country where they weren't supposed to go in the first place because there was a level 4 travel advisory. But, that was the will of God. They did eventually all escape, with some baloney story about how, God allowed them to escape because the door was open or unsecured or whatever you want to call it.
Wow.
But the thing that people don't know about Cam is this. Cam, so this is in Haiti, right? Where they went over and they were working in the orphanage and stuff like that. So Cam had a couple years earlier, they had a missionary by the name of Jeriah Mast who was sent over to Haiti. He molested, by accounts, around 30 young boys in Haiti. He came back to the U.S., they married him off, and sent him back to Haiti because, the wife is now supposed to prevent him from being a child sexual abuser. He goes back to Haiti, molests even more boys, comes back to the U.S., turns himself in, and he got sentenced to, I believe, 8 years for his crimes in the U.S. Cam went in and paid off the families of these victims in Haiti. Why do you think they were targeted?
Wow. So it's basically the same thing the Catholic Church does with their funding of paying off families for their abuse.
Mm-hmm. And where, so that's an example of like the absolution and the, like, did he really lose social status?
No.
No. And I believe he's in prison right now. You can Google his name and find out all of his details if anybody wants to know. But yes, like that did happen, and it's very interesting that then there's 17 missionaries in Haiti kidnapped, and they demanded 17 million, like 1 million for each human.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, right? So my point in bringing that up is like they showed this unconditional love for the abuser, but again, like, where is there meaningful forms of support for the victims of this predator?
Well, it's damaged property, so they've paid that off, $1 million ahead.
I don't even think they paid the victims that much, if I remember right.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean it went directly to them.
Yeah, it's horrifying when you think of it in the context of that, and that he had over 30 victims, and that like Cam went in and paid off the victims, and it's like this whole like they're supposed to be silent because being silent is forgiving, and if you're unforgiving, well then your sin is just as great as, if not greater than, what the abuser did to you.
Wow.
So if you're of a rebellious spirit like me, I'm rebellious, and you speak about it in ways that you can speak about it, you are automatically labeled as unforgiving. And I just can't reconcile that within myself. Like, forgiving somebody doesn't even mean that in the first place.
No.
Literally doesn't mean that. Forgiveness does not equate silence. Thank you. End of story. There's no question. There's no, it's a period. It's a full sentence.
I think you can come to terms with things without having to forgive in that way. But yeah, as far as is that good, like at any point in time, I think everyone should be held accountable in the same way. You know, I don't think that there should be this list of exceptions of family or of church family for that matter or whatever. That everyone gets held accountable to these sets of morals that we have, that we could say, you know, if because if it was a stranger or somebody else committing these atrocious acts and everything, then we'd want to hold them accountable. But in these church settings, it's like they just kind of get brushed off because that's your family or whatever. So,
So is it the concept of unconditional love for the, like,
yeah,
where does that, so there's this concept, they have this unconditional love for the abuser, but where is the love for the survivor of the victim of the abuse?
right, yeah, it's well, you know, that's that survivor was supposed to be obedient and all of that, so that doesn't line up with it. That doesn't line up with their form of love that they see. So, what programs are you involved with that help with abuse within the Anabaptist community and with the Amish community as well? I would like you to be able to talk about that some.
Oh, well, so I own the Misfit Amish. Our purpose is to bridge the cultural gaps and provide education and resources. So one of the things that I've done is I've collaborated with two other Anabaptist or ex-Anabaptist run organizations, and then I've collaborated with other ex-Anabaptists to write a research study about child sexual abuse inside of all churches, but primarily targeting Amish, Mennonite, Hutterite, and Anabaptist churches. The reason it's for all churches is because when you start talking to some Anabaptist people, what can happen is they will legitimately talk about how, oh, it happens in the world too. Well, it does, but we're talking about what happens inside of Amish and Anabaptist cultures, because one, I talk about Amish because that is what I know. I know about this culture, and I know how these children get treated. And not even just my story, there's stories out there on the Plain People's podcast, anecdotal evidence, but there hasn't been like a formal research study that's been accessible for ex-Anabaptists to even reference when they're trying to provide education. And then when we take it back to Amish leadership, which I absolutely intend to do in some form, shape, or way, make it available for Amish people, you know, I want them to know and understand that no, it isn't just happening inside of Amish and Anabaptist communities. It happens in many communities.
I'm glad that you're speaking up about all of this, and that you're trying to shine some light on these things that go just unresearched, that go by the wayside because of the secretiveness of that culture and of that your upbringing, the actual religion itself being kind of kept under covers. They need to be taking a closer look at those things instead of just relying on the elders of the groups to be passing along information.
Right. And see, that's one of the things is like just raising awareness about the way, because American culture and the Western culture as a whole has romanticized Amish, and they have done this to so much so that even like it doesn't seem to matter how big a story is or how much mainstream media will not touch abuse inside of Amish and Anabaptist communities with a 10-foot pole. And that's been, in my experience, happening for like at least, 18 years?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Now, I will say that in my case, my story was on 2020 and 2004, and that was a pretty big leap at that time. And then what happened is throughout the years, like more people came out with their stories. There are a ton of stories out there now about Amish abuse. And with the Me Too movement, it really seemed to enable a lot more people who are survivors from Amish communities to speak up.
Do you see any relation between this fear of questioning beliefs kind of tying into that, where it's kind of just brushed under the rug as, well, they just believe differently, so they have every right to do that. It's their religion. Do you see the relation with that, or do you see other aspects to it other than that?
Have you ever heard of the Supreme Court ruling called Wisconsin versus Yoder in like 1972, I believe?
No.
They legitimately said in the footnotes of that ruling that Amish people commit no crimes. You have, for example, you have people who do research on Amish people who they don't speak our language, first off. They've never been Amish, and they have decided that they're going to label people as Amish who are only currently conforming to the church's standards. And because of that, they have completely silenced anybody that was born Amish who still will deal with the repercussions of having been born Amish. For example, I literally have a family book here where my child is written out of the family book.
Wow.
Another example is, my child is shunned by some of my Amish relatives. And why do you think that is? I was told it's because I tore apart the family and the community. That's unfair to my child. My child has never done anything to be deserving of that, and that's not showing my child love and acceptance. Where is the love for my child?
It's funny. Not even that, but they're able to just rewrite history. They can
Exactly.
write you out of their history. They can do whatever they want with it.
Bingo.
That's
They literally write
horribly
people.
controlling.
Yeah, and our culture is really big on knowing your genealogy. Like, I can trace my ancestors back to who came off the boat. So,
With exception to the bastards of the family.
or the lies they told
Right,
in there.
exactly.
But yeah. But that's the thing, is they're really big on genealogy books, and we have these big genealogy books. Like, I remember there being a book about that thick.
So what happens when somebody gets shunned out of that community? Does that end that little part of the family tree suddenly, or?
I mean, it depends on the family, again, because sometimes some families are like, nope, we're not doing this. Other
Yeah.
families are like, yep, we're doing this. And like, for example, on my one family book, just written.
That seems so contradictory to relying on family history or trying to research those things or whatever. It's like, no, you're just creating it how you want.
But they're showing me love. Don't
Yeah.
forget that.
Another thing that's curious too, did you have a social security number, or did you have to get one after leaving
I didn't have a social security number. I didn't have a birth certificate. And the thing is that, like, I didn't even have an ID. The thing is that apparently there's some Amish people that will have birth certificates, and there's some of them that may get a social security number, but there's others that don't. There's some that don't even record their, like, the births.
That's just insane to me that you could have all of these people out there that just.
Mm-hmm.
How do you hold somebody accountable for things that doesn't even have any proof of existing in this country to begin with, or anything, or citizenship of that nature?
Well, see, that was a process, because, like, yeah, it's and even so, like, when you walk out of the community,
Well, even for you, like, if you got shunned out of the community and you don't have a social security number, how do you apply for benefits or anything that would be able to help you at that point?
you don't.
Wow, that's just like people.
Yeah.
I don't think people usually think of that. Like I hadn't.
Why would you think of that?
Right.
You
Yeah.
never experienced anything remotely close to that.
Right. But how long was the process just to get anything like that established? Like, you can't even get a job, a good job with benefits or anything without having a social security number or an ID or anything.
I mean, these are all facts, right?
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly how long it took. I think, one of the things that worked in my favor is I had somebody who was an ex-Anabaptist helping me, and they wrote letters for me to help establish my identity, because that was part of the process. Is I had to prove that I existed in the first place, because even though I'm an American citizen, there's like this whole, like, flying under the radar. But I did end up getting a social security number and a birth certificate, and then I was able to, like, get an ID, and I learned how to drive as a 19-year-old person. Wait, 20-year-old person. I was 20. Yeah, I went to Midwest driving school.
Wow.
But it just takes time. It takes a lot of time and patience, and kind of like.
Had to have been frustrating having to go through all that too.
Well, I'll tell you this. You can't pull back on the steering wheel and yell "whoa" and the car stops. That doesn't work.
Just it's frustrating enough for people just to have to go to the DMV to renew their license. I can't imagine having to go through all of that with the. I mean, I did have to get my birth certificate replaced once, and that was a fucking pain in itself. But then to go into having to do all of that shit just to get some sort of status as a legal citizen here would have to be, it would have to be frustrating and time consuming.
Yep. And that's why, organizations like the Misfit Amish do also exist for that. Like, if people, reach out for support, typically, we try to provide support as much as we can without endangering our own ability to navigate our own lives.
Right. So we've looked at kind of the Christian views of love and all of that. What would you say? So we know what love isn't by those terms,
yes.
Right? So what is love in your view? What from I don't know what you would label it, more of a humanist standpoint, or just outside of maybe most religions or whatever. What would your idea of love be?
I mean, part of love is, like, I think, accepting people for who they are. And when you think about that, it may not seem like it's much, but when you accept people for who they are, that can enable you to say, okay, so Sleuth's calling me every morning at 3 a.m., and I'm accepting that about him, but then having healthy boundaries. And me, I'm going to say, hey, Sleuth, like, it's really bothering me that you're waking me up and disturbing my sleep when I'm not awake every single morning at 3 a.m. I mean, I might be awake some mornings at 3 a.m. We know all about that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm going to talk to you about it in a way of like, hey, like, I just asked that, can you like write me first if I respond to a message and then like I tell you it's okay to call me at 3 a.m., then it's okay.
Right.
But for me, like that would be me setting a boundary that allows me to connect with you in a meaningful way without compromising my ability to have love and empathy and compassion for you as my friend.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that people will come from different upbringings, have different trauma and things that could relate to that. And maybe their boundaries are different than what yours would be for certain things.
Right.
And it's important to respect those.
And yours could be, I don't ever want anybody to call me.
Right.
And if that's a boundary, that's your boundary.
Yeah.
And you're allowed to communicate that. But in the same token, for the people that I personally know that don't ever want anybody to call them, what they want is they want for people to write them.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Right.
That's an acceptable way of connecting with people. And furthermore, in that case, you are actually honoring that person.
I would say that if those are my boundaries that I'm setting myself, then I have to understand that not everyone's going to want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you are cutting off certain aspects of things yourself at that point, and I think it's important to recognize that, and you don't get too caught up in, well, nobody's contacting me now. Well, yeah, you kind of set that boundary, so now you aren't going to have as many people contacting you that way.
Right. But in the same token, I do believe that when people establish those boundaries, it is important for you to honor that and accept that.
Right.
And then for you, it's also important to honor and accept that, some people may not be okay with that and they may prefer to talk on the phone, and that's okay too. It just means that those aren't the people that you are able to connect with in a healthy way.
Yeah. And there are, even to that extent, you could come to a compromise on the things as well. Like that's all healthy stuff still, it's all good. As long as both people are willing to give a little on those things or whatever, and it doesn't, affect them personally, then...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So let me ask you this. So what if I demanded you to answer my text within 5 minutes? How would you feel?
No, I wouldn't feel good about that. I've had that actually happen, and that was part of like one of my mental breakdowns I had, and started having a whole lot of anxiety, was having somebody constantly texting me and wanting me to answer right then, and I'd be at work and I couldn't answer right then, and this person knew my schedule. They had I'll talk about this later more.
Okay.
But, yeah, she knew my schedule and everything, and still continued to do this. And there was more to it than that. There was manipulation and things of other. But that itself is kind of a manipulation of sorts, trying to get you to pay attention to them constantly. And that is like a boundary that I set, is that I'm not going to do that. That causes me so much anxiety and stuff. Just the constant question marks, or I don't know if you've had that happen, where somebody is like you said, wanting you to respond right away within 5 minutes, and then there's a, well, question mark, question mark, question mark. Well, why aren't you answering? Well, why aren't you, and forcibly trying to get you to communicate with them. And that's not right. You shouldn't.
Have you ever heard of consensual communication?
Consensual communication?
Yep, consensual communication. Is it really consensual if somebody's trying to manipulate you into replying right away? And I'm not by any means saying that people shouldn't write me. I'm saying that I will answer when I get to it.
That's how I am. Personally, I've been I've been guilty of doing that before too.
Hmm.
It's all cyclical. The trauma causes you kind of get wrapped into the things that you end up going through sometimes. Not out of a subconscious, perspective or anything, but out of just your brain kind of learning those things or whatever, or trying to mimic those things or whatever. But it's weird how some of the things that caused me trauma and everything I ended up doing as well. And where I was the victim in one circumstance of it, I've been the abuser in others. And that's something tough to work through as well whenever you're caught up in that black and white thinking of right and wrong and good and bad, and thinking that, like we were saying that or maybe we were talking about it off the air, but about like how good things, it's kind of looked like it's on a scale or something. Yeah, we were talking about that a little while ago.
Hmm.
And it's not that way, it isn't that way. That's a very difficult thing to get through, and I think it keeps people trapped in those like trauma loops or whatever.
Well, and I would ask the question, because when you spiral, I call that like going down the rabbit hole. Because what happens typically is something happened that is causing you to relive whatever trauma, or even re-experience feelings and thoughts, and even seeing flashbacks of the trauma. And then your brain, even if you logically know that this isn't true, your brain automatically responds as if you were back there inside
Right.
of that type of situation.
Yeah, and it's actually what's happening there is whenever you're doing that, it's like it's amygdala responses at that point. It's going back into the part of the brain that's more primitive and everything. That's it's causing your brain to let out chemicals that are getting your heart rate to go up,
Hmm.
and it's counteracting things that might slow you down in that setting typically, and you'd
Hmm.
be able to think things through. It's
Right.
bypassing all of that, and you're going straight into the amygdala responses of fight or flight and things of that nature, and that's where you could end up with rage attacks or panic attacks or any
Anxiety
variant of,
attacks,
yeah,
yeah, any
paranoia,
variant. Hmm.
things of that nature. It could go, yeah, in different
And
directions, but it's still the anxiety or depression and things that are being kind of played on at that point.
are there any things you have found that bring you back to the present moment, where you're not stuck in that endless cycle, that loop?
A lot of what helped me with that was to me what I'd looked at was that I've kind of looked at it as a Pavlovian response of sorts. So in order to kind of retrain my brain into kind of calming down the moment, it's I've looked into more of cognitive behavioral therapy, um, e- EMDR. They have statistical like good there's good statistics on it for it being successful for people with PTSD and things of that nature. Whereas a lot of the drugs and things that they have might calm you down, but it isn't helping you work through the things that you need to work through to get your brain trained back into better responses to things.
So, as somebody who has done both CBT and EMDR, and ironically speaking, I did EMDR while I was still Amish. EMDR is not for the faint of heart
No.
at all. Period. Now, the way that I view the drugs is like they can be a temporary solution to assist you in navigating and figuring out your way, but long-term solution they are not.
Yeah.
Um, I still have a regular therapist that I see, Reason being because, as my therapist said when I was 19, who did the EMDR therapy, I'm probably going to have chronic PTSD responses throughout my entire life.
Yeah. I mean, even the EMDR isn't necessarily curing the thing or
No,
anything. It's making it less
it's making it
for you,
less. Yes.
and to where you can kind of talk yourself down in the moment, which is
To-
what those are trying to do. Most of those
It's figuring out a
tools.
way to navigate through
Right.
your trauma responses and becoming aware of what you're doing and being able to find ways to return back to the present where you are living today rather
Yeah.
than living in the trauma that keeps rearing its ugly head. And I will tell you this, sometimes you are subconsciously triggered and you do not know what triggered you.
I would say subconscious in the aspect of how, yeah, the amygdala responses and everything, if you're
Hmm.
referring to that. But
Yes.
yeah. But yeah, there's another thing was relaxation meditation therapy. It helped some with that. Whenever my mind got really scattered and it was just anxiety all the time, that had helped a good bit too. I
So
actually started combining kind of relaxation meditation and EMDR to where I wouldn't have the thing in front of me, but I'd do the relaxation. So, like, you know what EMDR is with the moving object or the lights or
I know
whatever.
all about
Yeah.
EMDR.
So
I
I've done it
definitely know.
too, but I've
Yeah.
done what I started doing was kind of the relaxation meditation where you're kind of calming yourself down, focusing on your breathing and stuff, and then you tense up different muscles and release according to your breathing. Now I
Hmm.
would combine that with focusing on different traumatic experiences and letting go and of the muscle tension and the idea or the thought or the experience in my head at the
Right.
same time, and kind of conditioning myself to try to let go of those things in a moment so that I'm not getting as worked up as what I would typically.
Well, and some people actually use what's called the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding
Yeah,
technique.
I've done that as well.
I will say this, that I mean, I don't do the 5-4-3-2-1. I do 5-5-5 because I'm not in that moment. I am not counting
Yeah,
any different numbers. I'm not counting down, but being able to, you know, they talk about acknowledging, but for me, like if I'm touching things that are present in life today, it really does help.
yeah,
Like my dog, I have a dog who like, she kind of like she demands attention in a very big way. I mean, she is a big dog. She only weighs like 130 pounds, so or 20. I don't know. I don't know how much she weighs. She kind of like eats a lot, and I know she's put on some weight. Last time we weighed her, she was 120 pounds. So there we are. But no, she's a big dog, and she like when somebody's in distress in my house, like she goes up to them and she demands attention, like right here, right now, and that's a really good thing. She does deep pressure type of therapy. Um, she's not formally trained, but she was trained by me, so she's like perfect for me.
yeah. That's cool.
And then another thing is like sometimes when I focus on like all the different things that I've seen in my life, the places I've went to, it's like I really am not back there. I have the capability of traveling. I have the capability of doing basically anything I want to in life. I'm not back there. I am not helpless. I am um, capable of taking charge of my own life, and I just have to make it through this. The reason that I talk about this is because you mentioned like breathing techniques and meditation techniques. A lot of times, well intentioned people can have, they can really have the best of intentions. But when they come at people with, like, hey, take a deep breath.
Yeah,
And there's this whole like demand of like, you have to do this in that space, you have to give that person options. Do
there's
not make the decision for
yeah.
them. Give them options. And I'm talking to therapists too, because therapists have done it too.
Yeah, there's also kind of the pseudoscience that goes along with those things as well. That's horse shit that kind of
Hmm.
does more harm than good.
Right. You can't demand that somebody use any of these techniques
Right.
and expect it to work. The person has to decide what they wish to explore, and then when they explore, they figure out different things that work for them.
Yeah, you can't do the work for somebody else. They have to do it themselves. So
Exactly.
um, one last thing, before we end up wrapping this up, I was going to ask. I'd seen one of your recent posts about autism, and I thought it would be good to maybe educate people a little bit about the Autism Speaks group and the little the little puzzle pieces and all of that people have up everywhere.
Oh, God. So April's coming, which is Autism Awareness Month. So, number one, if you want to support autistic people, don't use the puzzle piece. The puzzle piece is like offensive to the majority of autistic people. The autistic community does not embrace the puzzle piece. Rather, like, understand the history. It was first used in England. It was paired with the image of a crying child representing the puzzling tragedy of autism. It has continued to be used to symbolize that autism is puzzling or that we're missing a piece. Instead, you can use an infinity symbol. A rainbow-colored one is for neurodiversity in general, and a gold one is specifically for autism. Autism Speaks. First off, let me go into the, don't light it up blue either. Please do not light it up blue. It is promoted by Autism Speaks, which is one of the most horrendous and harmful organizations out there. They promote an abusive type of therapy for autistic people that causes them to. I've watched autistic people become suicidal from that therapy. So I don't care if you're like, oh, well, all ABA isn't bad. No, ABA is abuse. And if you look into the history of it, it is abuse. If you listen to the autistic people that are adults now that are able to communicate and educate you about it, if you hear them, they will tell you that it is abuse, because it absolutely is abuse. So Autism Speaks not only supports that, but it also, like, the lighted up blue supports the lighted up blue one. They support, like, less than 4% of their donations go to families of autistic children. And none of it goes to autistic adults. They are very invested in searching for a cure because they believe that we must be cured. So we're obviously missing a puzzle piece. And they typically speak over autistic voices, and it's like people that are not autistic who are doing biased research to try to promote their own, promote their own agenda in regards to autistic people, which in turn silences people that are autistic who are trying to raise awareness about these issues. If you want to support autistic people, I would suggest the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. They're in multiple countries, but they are absolutely invested in supporting autistics and autistics who advocate for themselves. Thank you.
All right. I appreciate that. I will get the link from you for that. And I'll be putting up your links for your podcast and your website as well. And
Thank you.
all of the wonderful resources involved with that. I'll put up the Recovering from Religion Foundation website, because I think that's a very good resource that more people should know about.
Yes. Recovering from Religion Foundation's website is fantastic.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it.
And there's seculartherapyproject.org as well.
Yes.
That has some good resources for finding a therapist that isn't that's one of the big problems in this area. And I know you're familiar with this area as well, so I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about. There's
Good
plenty
grief.
of Christian therapists in the area, and they aren't. Some of them aren't ashamed to promote themselves as Christian therapists. Others don't go by that, but they still push the same things. So I think it's good that there's a program out there where you can, even if there isn't any in your area, any secular therapists in your area, you're able to find them, and a lot of them do online therapy now. So I think that's good.
Yep, that is good.
But, all right. Well, thank you for being on. It's been a pleasure. I hope to have you. Well, I'll be having you on soon anyways. I've got you pinned down on that. You aren't getting out of it now. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, that's your story? You're going to try that with me? Of all people?
I'm just showing you love. I'm being controlling.
Really?
That's
You
don't
how
know
it
works,
me.
right?
No, you don't own me. This is not how it works. Not
Good.
in my world today.
Good. I'm glad.
On that note, I might just cancel that.
You know I'm teasing you.
I know. And
I'm very
teasing too.
laid back on any of that anyways. But all right. I'll wrap this up and stick around for a minute after. We'll go into some more things. But all right. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Our artwork is by Jamie Coptic. You can check out the rest of their work at jamiecoptic.studio. Our music is by Bridge City Centers, through and through, and you can find them at bridgecitycenters.com. If you like our content, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube and donate to us at paypal.me/skepticalsatanist. Hate mail, death threats, or fan mail, send that to jesuschristalmighty@hotmail.com or get a hold of us on Facebook. Whatever you do, don't leave this YouTube channel without liking and subscribing to keep up on all of our content.
Hail Satan, and hail yourselves.